In today's world, it can feel like we are getting more artificial by the minute, from social media to friendships and that disgustingly fake
technology they call artificial intelligence.
It sometimes can feel like
Nothing is real
anymore. Here at North Point Church, we know there is a real longing for authenticity, so you should totally trust me. A totally real human with all the same real human emotions you have.
Because it's not like we used artificial intelligence to make this video, or anything.
At North Point Church, we believe that authenticity isn't just a trendy fix. We believe that real authenticity is a real solution.
I am so excited. I can hardly contain my very real human face from showing my very real excitement. Let's tune in to learn from my
totally real friend Preston Ulmer, to learn how we can all be more authentic together. Let's save the humans together.
Good morning. I don't know that person who totally knows me and knows my name, but we'll call her Alexa, okay? So, hi, Totally Real Alexa. We're so glad that you're with us here at Springfield. Would you help me welcome all of our campuses? So welcome Dream Center, okay? Thanks for being with us, Dream Center. Republic, we're grateful that you are with us. You can keep cheering. We're thankful for Republic and Nixa, and our online community. And let me say this. I know you don't want to give a round of applause for yourself, but thank you, Springfield, for being here. You can give a round of applause for yourself. We're glad that you're here, and hope you have a warm cup of coffee. And we are going into this message today. We're talking in this series about, it's Save the Humans, which is what, as a staff, what we talk about. And it's like, be human, but be vulnerable, be authentic. That's what this whole teaching series is about. And today, we're going to jump into these big questions that all of us humans ask, like, why am I here? Who am I? Do I have value? And we will answer none of them. We will give more questions so that you can continue to pursue and wrestle with God Monday through Sunday. Then we'll see you next Sunday. We'll probably do the same thing over and over again. But let me tell you about a little human in our house, okay? Piper. I have two daughters, Piper and Brennan. And Piper is going into middle school, so technically we are now parents of preteens, which is pretty wild. And she's going into middle school. She came home this week and she said, Dad, I have 3 electives I need to choose between. And she's saying, I have outdoor activities. We're like, okay, what are outdoor activities? She goes, outdoor activities, like you go fishing. So if you teach this, I'm so thankful for you, but it's probably your excuse to go fishing while you're teaching class, okay? That's outdoor activity. Second one is like home economics. It's called something else, but it's like cooking, which I'm like, Piper could learn how to cook us some really great meals if she goes to home economics. And she said, Dad, did you ever do home economics? I said, I did. And she said, You've gone to cooking class? Like, yeah. Why? I didn't tell her this. Because all the girls went to cooking class. So in 6th grade, Dad went to cooking class. The one that she was really wrestling with was orchestra. Now, my wife is musically gifted in so many areas. I am not. I can't even hold a tune. I can't sing along. And so my wife was like, hey, I really want to encourage you to sign up for orchestra. And she's right. That would be the best decision. And here's why. And Piper did end up signing up for orchestra because it's like the development that happens, the skills that happen. Piper plays the viola. She's been playing for a few months now, so obviously it would fit into this lane that she's already in. But when you think of orchestra, we think of some like big names. When you think of fishing, I don't think of big names. There probably are big fishermen out there. But with orchestra, you think of big names like Beethoven. Beethoven had a career of about 45 years, and during those 45 years, he wrote about 700 pieces. And here's what's amazing about Beethoven. Beethoven, most of the pieces he wrote were after he lost his hearing. Okay? Now, I don't know if you know this or not. Orchestra, music, listening, hearing, he didn't have it. In fact, one of his greatest pieces, which could be argued his greatest piece, the Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, was ranked as like the greatest piece ever. And what's so amazing about it is he wrote this when he didn't have his hearing, and he conducted it when he didn't have his hearing. And so he's conducting, and as the story goes, he's conducting, everyone's cheering. He can't hear it. The applause went on so long, someone had to go up to him and turn him around so that he could see the standing ovation and the tears coming from people's faces. It was moving. Music moves people. And here's the $10,000 question. How did he do this? How did he become better when he lost his abilities? It's an amazing question, and scientists and historians, there are actually journals out there where they're writing about it, their theories. How did this happen? How did Beethoven become better as he lost his abilities? And here's kind of what they boiled it down to. There's no real answer, but they said he wasn't influenced by other composers and compositions. He had this skill, he lost his ability, and what he was influenced by, what a lot of journals are saying, an inner voice. Okay? Now, I don't know where you stand when it comes to, do you believe in God? Do you not believe in God? I'm not saying Beethoven was a Jesus follower or he wasn't. I'm just saying that there are people who study his life and say there was something else he relied on, this word reliance, something else he relied on that helped him do things that he naturally wouldn't be able to do. And he never backed off from doing it. And he leaned in, and it was greater than he could have ever imagined. That word, reliance, is the word that I want us to circle around for the next few moments. Reliance. And in your notes in the app, if you have the North Point app, you can pull that up, and there's fill in the blanks as we go. If you don't, it's North Point Mo in your app store where apps are available. But we're calling today REALiance. Okay, reliance. The word reliance comes from the 1500s. And the original meaning is this. This is really, really important. To retreat back to or to fall back on. To retreat to something. To retreat to something or retreat to someone. That's what reliance is. And there's an idea that we'll get at in just a moment. And the idea was the core conviction of so many characters in the Bible. People like Moses. This idea that we'll get to. People like Moses, that he didn't have all the abilities, and there were some things that popped up for Moses that made him not want to do what God said. And nevertheless, Moses freed the Israelites out of Egypt. There's been many movies made about it, but the Bible story, we'll jump into in a second, talks about this idea. And then you have people like Queen Esther. If you don't know that story, it's an amazing story. Esther's a Hebrew, and she's a Jewish queen in Persia. She's married to King Xerxes, and she's not supposed to talk with him unless she's invited into his courts. And this scenario, by the way, is not what I recommend for marriages, okay? I could not imagine this was a healthy marriage. But he didn't invite her into the courts for about 30 days, and she learned that there was a plot to exterminate the Jews, the Hebrew people. So she told her people, pray and fast for me. I need to enter his courts, and I need to plead with him that he not do this. And she did. And she saved her people. There's stories like that. That's because of this idea that we're about to get to that revolves around a reliance. Jesus is a major character in the Bible. I would say the whole Bible points to Jesus. Jesus says things like, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. Jesus is the clearest picture we have of God. And Jesus says, I don't do anything unless the Father's told me to do it. It's this core reliance on the Father. You have people like Paul. Paul wrote a big part of the New Testament, and there's a scene in the book of Acts where Paul is in this temple. There's lots of inscriptions to gods, lots of different idols, and there's one inscription that says, to an unknown God. And Paul's like, that's the God that you don't know. That's the God I want to talk to you about. And he says, I want to talk to you about the unknown God, the God you don't know. And he does this in such a creative way. And as far as ministry success, okay, as far as did a bunch of people start following Jesus out of this? Not necessarily, but he did it based on his reliance, based on this idea. People who have shaped the stories in the Bible, it's this idea. You ready? It's in your notes like this. The greatness of your life is determined by who you rely on, not what you accomplish. That's not about setting out to accomplish great things. I know that there's a lot of people out there like, you can be the greatest you, and the greatness of your life, the lives that shaped history were not determined by how great the person was. It was determined by who they relied on. So we're going to talk about the story of Moses. Let's jump in. It's Exodus chapter 3. It's an incredible story. Moses at this point, he was in Egypt. He's been exiled, and he's been a shepherd for many, many years. And this is the famous scene of Moses in the burning bush. This bush that's on fire, but it's not burning, and it's the voice of God's coming out of it. It's pretty wild. And this is what it says. When the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, speaking of Moses, God called to him from within the bush, "Moses, Moses." And Moses said, "Here I am." Which, if there's a voice calling to you from a burning bush, I don't know if I say, "Here I am," or if I run. But Moses decided to stay, okay? "Do not come any closer," God said. "Take off your sandals, for the place where you're standing is holy ground." Then he said, "I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." At this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. The Lord said, "I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt." So remember, the Israelites are held in captivity in Egypt. They're slaves in Egypt. They're crying out to God, "Save us," for hundreds of years. "Save us, save us." And he says, "I've heard them crying," which, by the way, is really good news for us. That all the stories in the Bible talk about God hearing us and then coming to us and being with us even before we cry out. But this is an example of he's heard their cries, and he said, "I'm concerned about their suffering. So I've come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them up out of that land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey." Now, I just want to pause there. That's very strange imagery, milk and honey. When I was younger and I would hear this phrase is throughout the Old Testament in different places. When I would hear this is so dumb. I would think like Candyland, okay, the game Candyland, but with Cheerios, like Honey Nut Cheerios. I'm like, what is the land flowing with milk and honey? And as a kid, you can think about that. As an adult, you're like, that's not true. It'd be awesome. It's not true, though. This is what it means. Land flowing with milk and honey means like the land is lush, green, animals that will give you milk. They're everywhere, and they're fed well. Honey comes from bees. Bees are around flowers and pollen. This land is where everyone wants to be. So he says, the land flowing with milk and honey, the home of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, Jebusites. I will add the mosquito bites, because any land like this has a ton of mosquito bites. And now the cry of the Israelites has reached me. And I've seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. So now go. I'm sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt, which is amazing. He was raised by Pharaoh. He's raised by Pharaoh. Now he's going back to challenge Pharaoh and to deliver God's people. But Moses said to God, "Who am I?" It's a big question. Who am I? Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? And God said, "I will be with you." Now, it's a funny answer. I think it's funny. Moses says, "Who am I?" And God says, "I will be with you." It's not an answer, God. Right? It's not an answer. God, who am I? Here's not what he did. He didn't say, "You are Moses. They are going to write about you, Moses. You are Moses. You are a leader, Moses. Moses, you are Moses." He didn't say it. You are an entrepreneur. You are someone who can gather people. It had nothing to do with who Moses was, did it? No. Had everything to do with who Moses was supposed to rely on. God. Who am I? Well, I will be with you. I will be with you. Like if I'm going to go skydiving, okay, if I'm going to jump out of a plane, it's going to take a lot to get me there, and you say, "Hey, we're going to put a parachute on your back, Preston, and you're going to jump out of a plane." I don't know how high we go, 10,000 feet, whatever, but you're going to jump out of a plane. All you got to do is pull the ripcord. Would I go? No, absolutely not. Absolutely. I just don't trust that the ripcord is going to, so many things go wrong. And you're like, why? You have what you need. No. But if you said, "Preston, we're going to go skydiving," and there's this expert skydiver, one of the best in all of Missouri. They've been doing this for 30 years. And they're going to strap themselves to you, and you're going to jump, and then you're going to fall. Would I go? For sure I'd go. For sure. Because of the person I'm relying on. It's the same answer for Moses. Moses, who am I? And God says, "I will be with you. I'll be with you. I'll be leading you." In your notes, I said it like this: discovering my identity doesn't automatically deliver my destiny. I will always need clarity. Always need clarity. I am not convinced that life is about find your purpose, live your purpose. I think purpose is not the end. Purpose is a means to an end. The end is rely on God, find God, rely on God. And it's all about getting more and more clarity from God, leaning into the voice of God, hearing God. What is God asking me to do? What are his words telling me to do? What is it like to be in community with God's people and to hear from him? I think more and more clarity around a few things. 3 things specifically: clarity around your ability, clarity around your community, and clarity around your destiny. That really big word, destiny. So when it comes to your ability, let me say this. That question, who am I, if that's not resonating with you because you're like, I haven't lost my memory, I have my driver's license, I know who I am. We ask that question in different ways like this: am I enough? That one would resonate with us, right? Am I enough? This very human question. Am I enough? I want to start a business. Am I savvy enough to grow the business? I want to be in a relationship. Okay, well, am I lovable enough? Am I enough? I want to go to this school. Okay, do I have good enough grades? That question, am I enough? Am I enough? Am I enough? I want to be a Chiefs fan, but will they do it today? They will do it. They will do it today, okay? They are enough. The Chiefs are enough. This question, am I enough? Who am I? However you revolve around that, we need clarity. So here's the first one. When it comes to ability, it's a big deal. Insecurity holds us back more than inability. We're all insecure about something. Insecurity, that shakiness in us that says, don't even try. But God might be telling me to make the phone call, don't even try. Well, but what if God's telling me to step out and don't even try? That's insecurity. It makes us not even want to try. Usually because we've tried before and it hasn't worked. But it's not typically about our ability. And the story of Moses helps us get there. So Moses, all throughout Scripture, we'll talk about this more coming up, but in your Bible, it would say things like he had a speech impediment or he had a stutter. It might be something else. But whatever it was, he had an insecurity that God gave clear directions, didn't he? You are going to go to Pharaoh. And Moses goes, who am I to do that? It's an insecurity. There's something about it. And I truly believe that for all of us, insecurity holds us back more than inability. I'll tell you where this has come up in my life in a lot of different ways. When I was in high school, my dad and I, we joke about this story now, okay? So if you're like, was he a good dad? He was a great dad. My dad and I would go dirt biking. I lived in New Mexico, which is just desert, beautiful desert, but it's just desert. So we would load our dirt bikes into the bed of a truck. We'd drive his truck into the middle of nowhere, and then we'd unload them. We'd have lunch in our backpacks, and we would just ride. And his rule was kind of like, hey, son, until you are old enough to buy a bike that's faster and bigger than mine, you will not have a bike that's faster and bigger than mine, which is kind of what caused the problem we got into. So we're out there riding. We're just having a great time. I'm following Dad, and we go miles away from this truck. This is before that you could GPS, like there's my truck, and then take me back to this, before all that stuff. So we're going in the middle of nowhere, and we see in the middle of the desert this compound, okay, just this, it's a weird building. Now let me just ask you this. If you see a compound in the middle of the desert, do you think you should go closer? Some people are saying, yes, those are my dirt biking friends. Those are the ones that we're like, let's ride. The answer is no, you don't go closer. There's not a no trespassing sign, but there doesn't need to be a no trespassing sign. Nobody should be in this area. And we go a little closer. And we're like, what do you think's over there? I'm like, I don't know, Dad, what do you think's over there? And I'm just kind of, relying on my dad. So we're talking back and forth. And then out of this compound come 2 giant dogs, big dogs, super happy to see me. Okay, these dogs were like really excited. Or they're hungry. It was one of the two. But I think they were hungry. And they're running and they're barking and they're vicious. My dad on his bike goes through his helmet. I can hear him. He's like, we gotta go. And he just takes off. And I'm like, okay, and I'm trying to go, and I can't kick a dirt bike. Like, I got to get it into first gear to go. I was in neutral. I cannot kick this thing into first gear. And I remember being terrified. I might have mixed, like, words you shouldn't say with prayers all together in my helmet, just, like, trying to get going. I'm trying to get God's attention and then trying to be forgiven to go into heaven if I have to get there today. Okay, so I'm just going. The dogs got probably to the edge of the stage that close to me, and then my bike took off. I did a wheelie, which every trick I did on my dirt bike was by accident, but I did a really good one. And I go and I land and we take off. So I'm following Dad. Well, then out of this compound comes a truck, and there's some people in the back of a truck with their dogs in the bed of the truck, and they're looking for us. And now it's like, you know, I always liked these movies. I hate being in a movie like this, but now it's like one of those what's going to happen next movies. And we go off the trail, and we're sitting there, we're hiding, and we're watching, and then we're safe. And I'm like, Dad, what happened? Like, you left me to die. And he said, I didn't have to outrun the dog. I had to outrun you. No, he didn't say that. My dad didn't tell me that. He said, I knew you were going to be fine. You would catch up. I'm like, you didn't know? There's no way you knew. He's like, yeah, I knew you were going to be fine. And now we joke about it. That's still his defense to this day, that he just knew I was going to be fine. The next time I got on a dirt bike, it had nothing to do with inability. I knew how to kick it into first gear most of the time, okay? It had everything to do with insecurity. Now, having my dad there, did that help, relying on him? Not for a while, okay? It took some time. But it was insecurity. It was, I've been here before, I've tried this, it didn't work. In Moses' life, listen, the story goes that Moses made a ton of mistakes. And it would make sense that at this point in his life, probably between the age of 60 to 80, that Moses would be like, who am I? Who am I to do this? Insecurity. If God is speaking to you and drawing you into a Jesus way of living, drawing you into what it would mean to raise kids a certain way, what it would mean to be in relationships a certain way, what it would mean to be content and not to pursue possessions all the time. What God's drawing you in and speaking to you. If you say, I need to accomplish more, what if you realize, okay, there's insecurity here because I've tried to step out, but if I rely on God, let's go. Let's go. It's not about your ability. And the second thing we need clarity on is this. When it comes to community, let me say this too. The opposite of insecurity, the opposite of insecurity is stability. It's stable. It's not shaky. It's stable. It's amazing. Moses walks up to this bush and God says, take your shoes off, take your sandals off. You're on holy ground. Moses, you're on very stable ground. God's always been calling people, Moses, this is a stable place. This is about God. It's not about you. This is about God. Everything about the story is that it's someone trying to learn, how do I rely on God? Moses, take off your shoes. It's stable here. It's holy. So here's the second one. When it comes to community, stop looking for where you belong and start looking at who you belong to. This can drive us crazy if we're like, where do I belong? Where do I belong? Where do I belong? Especially as we're taking steps to follow Jesus. It doesn't matter if you're exploring the faith and you're asking questions and you're trying that on, and that's very different for you, or you're thriving in your faith, or you're building your faith, or you're owning your faith, whatever stage you're at, we would say, keep going, and you will find this battle within you and this battle outside of you. You're going to find that as the good news, we call that the gospel, makes itself at home in you, it makes you feel like you're not at home. I mean, there's always this struggle going on that you might say, I need to remove myself from some unhealthy situations. Well, where do I belong now? Where do I belong? And what's so important in those situations to say, okay, who do I belong to? Now, for Moses, he was not a stranger to this. He didn't know where he belonged. Moses was a Hebrew. Moses was then raised in Egypt in like one of the nicest places in the known world. Okay? raised by Pharaoh in Pharaoh's house, raised by Egyptians. So then you have Moses, who also was pushed out by both people groups, didn't know where he belonged. And here's what's interesting. The word, when we talked about, sometimes when people talk about the Moses story, it's like, did he have a stuttering problem or a speech impediment? Well, commentators, people who read the Bible and dive into it and they know the language, say actually the word that's used when it comes to speech impediment or stuttering for Moses is this phrase, uncircumcised lips. Now here's why that's interesting. To be a Jew, you had to be circumcised. I mean, that was part of being a Jew, you were circumcised. So for him, he's saying, I don't know, where do I belong? Where do I belong? In fact, when he went to Pharaoh, and then he spoke to Pharaoh, and he goes back to have a conversation with God. After this is later on in Exodus, that you see Moses say, God, I told you I had not a stuttering problem, I have uncircumcised lips. Where do I belong? We even see that Moses, on that journey back to Egypt, his son isn't circumcised. Well, for a Jew to not circumcise their own son is like, you would never do that unless you were thinking maybe you don't belong. Where do I belong? A constant battle. And what he keeps going back to is this. Okay, I will be with you. I will be with you. That if you don't feel at home or you feel out of sorts and you're trying to lean into what God's telling you to do and it feels like it's so hard and I don't feel like I belong, okay, what we can always go back to is who's the one calling you? Who's the one doing that? These chairs, if they had these at Goodwill, you know Goodwill? It's like Walmart but cheaper. It's Goodwill. If they had these chairs at Goodwill, I actually don't know how stable this stool is, so I'll sit on this for just a little bit. The way they price things at Goodwill is according to season and according to categories. So they're not looking at who made the thing, they're just going to give value to it based on whatever the price sheet says. So the last one I looked at for Missouri was like that chairs were priced between like $10 and $20. Okay, I know everyone from Springfield is just going to rush to Goodwill and they're going to buy a bunch of stuff. It's fine, whatever. But I'm just saying they have so much inventory coming in that they could price this at $10. And then, not the pillow though, the pillow would be extra. They could price this 12, 15. Why? Well, because there's so much inventory coming in that it's like, okay, we don't really have time to look at the value, the actual value of the thing. What we have time to do is just to say, okay, according to where it belongs, it has $10, $12, $20. Now, the way you find the value of something like this is you look at the designer, right? Who made it? Who's the one that made this? Now, shout out, what's a nice furniture store? What's a nice... I don't know any of these places. You guys vacation way different than me. Okay, but I'm just saying, IKEA? No, IKEA doesn't fit either. But if this is a nice furniture store, this is from a nice, Ashley Furniture. Is that nice? That's nice enough. Ashley Furniture, that if we bought a chair and we're like, oh, that was such a good deal, and you look at the tag, what it would tell you is the value is totally based on the designer, not based on the category, on the grouping. It's not based. Our world, though, will group us to say we belong in a certain box. This is what happened in your past. Okay, this is what happened in your family. You're in that group now. Sorry, you're in that group. This is what happened at your work. This is what happened when you lost your job. This is what happened when your business went down. This is what happened when your kids went a different direction. This is what happened when you started having questions. And it puts you in boxes, boxes, boxes. And you're like, okay, my value based on where I belong is pretty low. It's not based on where you belong. Your value is based on your designer. And your designer is God. And God said every person, male and female, is made in the image of God. Every single person. Does that mean your value goes down when you make a mistake? No. Does that mean your value goes up when you make a mistake? No. You are just so valuable, as is. As is. So when God speaks to us and calls us into new ways of living, we can say, okay, He's the one who gives me value. I don't have to operate out of insecurity. I belong with Him. our hope at North Point is that you would say, I do find places to belong. I find this to be a safe place. We want groups to be a safe place. There's not lines in the sand. We're just on a path together, and we're moving together towards God. But regardless if you'd say, I feel at home or I don't feel at home, you can always say, I know who's with me. I know who's with me. That was his answer to Moses. And here's the third thing we need clarity around. It's a big word. When it comes to your destiny, who you are following daily matters more than where you end up one day. Destiny is a big word. I thought of what other words should we use? And then it's well, all of us are intrigued by what's my destiny. When I go see movies, most movies are about destiny, like pursue your destiny, pursue your purpose. And here's what we just know to be true. Who you're following daily matters more than where you end up one day. It just matters more. The ancient Near Eastern people, the Jewish people, before they had the Bible, there were scribes. Scribes would write down the stories. And before there were scribes, how do you think they passed information along? It was through oral tradition. They would tell stories. And we don't tell stories all that much anymore. We watch stories on TV. We listen to stories. Crazy if you listen to true crime documentaries on audio on your spare time for fun. To me, that's crazy. But you listen to stories. We don't really, campfire style, sit around and tell stories. But this would be normal. This would be normal. Before written word, this is how people pass stories along. So long before this story was ever written in any form, it was passed on through oral tradition. So it would be normal if you were part of this culture to be able to, maybe you're going to bed and they're telling you the story of Moses. You would know the story of Moses at a young age, you'd know this story. And there's another story you'd know. And this would be the story of King Nebuchadnezzar. Now, I don't know if they would tell the same story sitting down okay, good night, kids, and we're going to tell you the story of King Nebuchadnezzar and Moses, and you compare and contrast. But here's what we do know about that culture. When stories were told, it was not so that you could say, okay, that's the right way to live, that's the wrong way to live, do this, don't do that. That was not why the stories were told. The stories were told so that you could internalize the stories, compare the outcomes, and say, what kind of life do you want to live? What kind of life is going to add to the community? What kind of life is going to be the best life? It's no shock that Jesus would say, I came to give life and life abundantly. That's a very Jewish thought. So they told this story of Moses. And then, let me tell you the story of Nebuchadnezzar. The story of Nebuchadnezzar is found in what's now Daniel chapter 4, a book in the Bible. But the story of Nebuchadnezzar is about a king who was building his own palace, building his own kingdom. In fact, you have Moses, who's relying on God. Remember, the greatness of our life is determined by who we rely on, not what we accomplish. But then we do have the story of a man the greatness of his life was determined by what he accomplished, not who he relied on. And here's how the story goes. It's Daniel chapter 4. All this happened to King Nebuchadnezzar. 12 months later, as the king was walking on the roof of the royal palace of Babylon, he said, is not this the great Babylon I have built as the royal residence by my mighty hand and for the glory of my majesty? Ugh, that's just gross. For the glory of my majesty. No one wants that on their tombstone. No one's going to that funeral. Okay, for the glory. And then it says, immediately, what had been said about Nebuchadnezzar was fulfilled. He was driven away from people and ate grass like the ox. His body was drenched with the dew of heaven until his hair grew like the feathers of an eagle and his nails like the claws of a bird. The imagery is this. He became less and less human. We're all made in the image of God. And what happens to that image, it doesn't go away. But we don't show up in the world in the way we're supposed to when we live for ourselves. It's less and less human. One of the series, Save the Humans. You want to become less human. Live for yourself. I mean, the imagery is clear. And then it says, at the end of the time, I, Nebuchadnezzar, raised my eyes toward heaven, and my sanity was restored. Then I praised the Most High. I honored and glorified him who lives forever. And good night, sweet dreams. Compare the two. It wasn't like that. But they would know the stories. And if someone was living for themselves, it would probably be fine for someone else to say, hey, remember King Nebuchadnezzar? We don't want to dehumanize ourselves and others. That's what happens when we live for our own kingdom. We say, I have to hit these financial goals. I have to get that job. I have to make sure the kids do this. I have to make sure the vacations look like this. I have to, and if it's all for ourselves and for our kingdoms, we become less and less what God intended us to be. And the contrast is like that. To rely on God, not perfectly, Moses was far from perfect, but to rely on God, that's a great life. To rely on your own accomplishments, that's what that would look like. But it's never too late, by the way, to lift your eyes and to see God. And so Jesus comes on the scene. And Jesus says some incredible things. And listen here. Jesus knows these stories. Jesus' invitations, I hope you start to see them like this. Instead of, here's the command of Jesus, do it or else. I hope you see it as an invitation. Jesus' invitations are always ones of reliance, of retreating back to his words. So when he says, all of you who are heavy burdened, your emotions are heavy, you can't take a solid breath, all of you who are emotionally, that you are burdened, come to me. What is that? That is a call to reliance. Rely on Jesus. When Jesus says, if you have bitterness in your heart, and if that's you, and you're like, I'm struggling, there's just people who've done me wrong, Jesus says, okay, forgive your enemies. Forgive your enemies. And you're like, no, they need what they deserve. You can try that, but you may feel less and less like what God intended you to be if you go that route. But you can retreat back to the words of Jesus. That's called reliance. And you can forgive. Maybe you're in a season of mourning, and Jesus says, blessed are those who mourn. You retreat back to those words. Maybe you're in a season of like, I don't know where the next provision is going to come from. And Jesus' words would say, and they do, look at the birds of the air, and look how God takes care of them. How much more will he take care of you? His image is on you. And as he takes care of you, you learn contentment with what you have. And you could be like, no, I have to have more. Or you could say, I will retreat back to those words. So we have stories that can change our life that really have to do with who do we rely on? At the end of the day, who do we rely on? There was in the 1600s, it's called the Westminster Catechism. And what it is it's this document that was formed in the 1600s because the church in England was looking at the church in Scotland and saying we need to have more unity within the church. And so all different backgrounds and what would be called denominations were around. And so pastors and theologians came together and they formed the Westminster Catechism. And here's what it is: 107 questions and answers that they came up with that kind of unify them around what it means to love God. Okay? So we're going to go through all 107. No, we're not. Some people are getting up in the back. We're not going to go through all 107. We're just going to go through the first one. First one says this: this is the first question they ask, what is the chief end of man? Okay? Meaning this, what's the purpose of all this? What's the goal of life? It's a big question. What's the chief end of man? And the answer is this: to enjoy God, or to love God, to glorify God, and to enjoy him forever. To glorify God and to enjoy him forever. Remember in the Nebuchadnezzar story, I looked up, gave glory to God. Glory is praise. Praise God. Why? Because he's good. Everything God does is good. The chief end of life is not, what's my identity? What's my destiny? It's not this stuff. It's clarity around how do I rely on him? Because to rely on God is to enjoy God, his goodness, his power in all areas of our life. And I think that was written in the 1600s. I think it's still evident today. So in your notes, on your app, actually we have daily reliance and then a greater than sign and then a blank, okay? If you're taking notes through your app. If you're not, you can write this in a connection card. Daily reliance is greater than blank. Now, in the app, typically when you put in an answer, if it's not the right answer, it like shakes at you and then it reveals the right answer. You put whatever answer in that space and it's going to be the right answer. Daily reliance on God is greater than what? What's the thing that's driving you? What's the thing you're like, no, that's the chief end of my life. I need to have that. What is that? And you are just faced with different stories, and you get to choose which story you think you would like to end up living. And that's up to you, but I would encourage you to choose Jesus. Daily reliance on Jesus is greater than what? And fill in the blank. And my hope is that for 7 days, for a whole week, that you would try this, that you just remind yourself, whether it's a screenshot on your phone and it's the home screen, whether it's written on a mirror in your house, whether it's on a card, whatever it is, you just remind yourself, daily reliance on Jesus, retreating back to Jesus, is greater than whatever it is that you are living for now. So I'll pray for us, and then we'll talk about next steps. God, we're grateful for all the stories that you've already shared with us today, and we're grateful that you're still with us in the middle of our story. It's never too late to lift our eyes. It's never too late to be able to say, oh, God's restoring to me what the purpose that I have, and it is to rely on you. So would you help us to do that? Help us to be wise moving forward with our decisions, to rely on you, and may we retreat back to your words, Jesus. It's in Jesus' name, amen.